Hello, and welcome back to the UAS Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by Tom Driscoll, founder and chief technology officer at Echodyne Corporation. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Danielle.
Of course, we're excited to talk with you today. So, Tom, why don't we start by having you tell us about your career, how you ended up at Echodyne, and what Echodyne does as a company?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to give the short version of the overview. So I did my graduate work, my PhD in physics, in this new field of physics called metamaterials. And we won't have time to get into detail on it today, but what this metamaterials physics technique allows you to do is manipulate light and radio waves in ways that were impossible or at least very, very difficult before. So a concept, a field that's going to be useful for a wide variety of things. But amongst those things are communication devices and radio devices like radar and cellular and everything that uses microwaves. So following my PhD, this attracted a lot of attention from some technologists in Seattle. You might know the name Bill Gates. You might also know the name Nathan Myhrvold, who was Bill Gates's first CTO. They got very interested in this field of metamaterials and ultimately decided they wanted to recruit people to come up to work in Seattle with them on developing ideas from academia into concepts and platforms that could become investable companies. So they recruited me. I came up, spent a couple of years working with them, and ultimately that led to a number of concepts of hypotheses for startup companies, one of which was Echodyne, which was to do radar. And I just really loved radar as a deep subject, something that's allowed me to continue learning over the 8 years here. And so I decided that I wanted to go and help co-found that company, Echodyne.
Super cool. All right. Well, we wanted to talk about the term situational awareness a bit. It's very popular within our industry. So what are some of the challenges that situational awareness poses, and what makes the issues surrounding it so difficult?
Yeah, situational awareness, sometimes also airspace awareness. There's a lot of different terms for this. I think the hardest part of this is no one's actually asking for complete situational awareness. They don't want to know about everything. They don't really want to know about the cars that are outside their fence or the bird that is not a threat. They only want to know about certain types of objects, and therein lies the challenge. Discerning the boring world that exists that's no threat to security from those rare and occasional objects that are a security threat or a safety threat. So I think that that's the really hard part of it. You need to have high quality sensors and systems to discern between what's not a threat and what is.
All right. So let's pivot to Multisensor Fusion. Can you dive into what that is and how it pertains to Echodyne's technology?
Absolutely. I think it ties well into the previous question about situational awareness as well. So all sensors have strengths and weaknesses. It's just a statement of fact. And maybe, one quick intuitive example, if you compared two different types of cameras, one that was a thermal camera and one which was a normal daylight camera, the thermal camera can see very well at night, whereas the daylight camera can't. But during the day, the daylight camera can tell you what color something is, and the thermal camera will never be able to do that. So just an example of strengths and weaknesses within the camera domain. But then as we branch out, all of these different types of sensors, radars, cameras, ultrasonic sensors, passive signal detector sensors, they all have strengths and weaknesses. And the best approach one can take as a system designer or as an integrator is to pair up multiple sensors in ways that combine their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses. Multisensor fusion is how you do that. It's not just the approach to that combining of sensors, but it's a set of mathematics that kind of tell you how you stitch their data together. That's maybe a little bit too deeply technical for our talk today.
No problem. So is that pairing what makes it so powerful? And is it also a challenging aspect in multisensor fusion?
Yeah, that pairing does make it very powerful. It is a challenging thing to do right. There are definitely integrators out there that are outstanding at it. I think when a lot of folks get into security space, they have a learning curve to come up on multi-sensor fusion. And you need to pair high quality sensors. So a classic combination that we do a lot is we sell radars. And our radars are used, the information that comes out of them, the track is used to point a camera and to zoom that camera in on an object. And so that camera needs to know ahead of time from the radar where to zoom, or it would never be able to find the object. And so you need a good radar that's going to provide high quality tracks so that you can get that camera pointed and zoomed in the right direction. Because if you point your camera at the wrong direction and you zoom in and all you see is empty sky, then you don't know whether you missed left, right, up, or down. And there's really no way to tell.
Okay, so in what ways have the requirements on radar specifically changed in the past decade or so of drones?
Yeah, that's a great question. Radar is an old sensor. It's been around since, well, a little bit after World War I, it started coming into use. But for most of its history, radar has been about detecting objects that stand out very strongly. So you might be looking for, a fighter jet or even just a normal airplane in a big open empty sky, or you might be looking for something that's really fast, like a ICBM or a cruise missile that's moving far faster than anything else. That's what we in engineering call a sparse problem. There's kind of only one thing, and your job is to find it. But drones have really flipped that around because drones operate in dense environments. They can fly just a few tens of meters off the ground, and they're about the same size as a bird. They move about the same speed as a bird. And so the requirements on radar have moved from find that one thing in a sparse scene to be able to identify within a dense scene what's a threat, what is the drone, and what's not a threat, which is a bird. And that's a much harder problem for radar.
Interesting. Okay. What would you say is the size of opportunities for drones that's still as yet unrealized? Or on the flip side, what is the size of the problem from drones that exists today or will exist in the future?
Absolutely. That opportunity and problem is really, I think, what's pushing and pulling everybody in the industry and the entrepreneurial space to really get after helping solve this. We see projections for the economic size of unlocking the airspace and permitting drones to fly safely of all shapes and sizes, everything from photographers wanting to fly a DJI Mavic up to companies wanting to fly fully autonomous Cessnas to do package delivery. We see the size of that market as growing to multiple tens of billions to potentially as much as $100 billion over the next decade, provided we can create the right sensors and systems that allow that to all happen safely. Because if it's not safe, then the FAA and other regulatory bodies they won't allow it. And so there's a massive upside opportunity in commercial endeavors to unlock the airspace. And then the flip side of the coin, as you pointed out, is that drones are being used for a lot of negative, or at least let's just say problematic uses as well, both in the United States and in country, as well as in conflict zones. And we need to come up with solutions so that as drones continue to become more and more performant, more and more available, that we haven't created sort of a slippery slope where we've entered a world where there's no such thing as security anymore.
For sure. Really great points there. So, what is the role of ground-based versus airborne sensors in unlocking the airspace?
Yeah, we're going to need a mix of both. It is nice to be able to have sensors on the aircraft or on the drone and have those sensors directly and immediately perform safety of flight so that you can do collision avoidance so your drone never runs into a manned aircraft or even another drone. But these drones, as I said, can take all shapes and sizes from under a pound to multiple thousands of pounds. And so the smallest ones may never be able to mount a sensor on the platform. They may just not be able to carry it. And then there's the price consideration as well. You're unlikely to ever put a $10,000 radar on a $100 drone. It just doesn't make economic sense. And so we're going to need a mix of airborne sensors on the platforms when they can be supported and when they make economic sense. And when we can't do that, we're going to need networks of ground-based sensors, combinations of radars and cameras and other sensors, to clear the airspace, to watch for anything that we didn't expect was going to be there. And if we do find something that's unexpected and there's a potential collision event, then we need to announce that into some airspace network so that the drone or the drone's operator can be made aware and take action and avoid the collision.
All right. So I do have one last question for you here, and that is, how is the conflict going on overseas in Ukraine shaping UAS technology these days?
Yeah, that has been really just a crucible and a petri dish. The speed at which new uses and new counters for drones and UAS in general, and in fact, unmanned air, ground, and sea vessels, the speed at which that's all evolving due to the conflict or in context of the conflict of Ukraine is incredible. And from a security perspective, it's actually quite terrifying because things we used to be able to count on just a couple of years ago in terms of safety are no longer things we can count on. Some of them I shouldn't talk about on air, but one good example is drones. Previously, 5 years ago, every drone had signals that talked about where it was, how it was moving. These are the signals that are transmitted between the drone and the operator using the remote control. It's now quite possible and in fact common to create drones that emit and receive no signals. They are completely dark. And these dark drones are very difficult to pick up. In fact, radar may be one of the only ways that you can pick up dark drones at any decent range. That has, just in the last year or two of Ukraine, really escalated because, of course, there's an advantage if your drone cannot be seen by most of the adversary's sensors.
Thank you again, Tom, for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close it out?
No, I don't think anything comes to mind. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. Yes, I really enjoyed it. Again, today we are joined by Tom Driscoll, Chief Technology Officer at Echodyne. Thank you again, Tom, for joining us on the podcast. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please contact UAS Magazine. We hope that you enjoyed this episode and look forward to next time. Until then.